Okay, let's unpack this. Tonight we are diving into a story that unfolded in, just 72 hours. But it may permanently reshape the fundamental structure of North American trade.
It really might.
You sent us a truly fascinating stack of sources detailing an economic shockwave that didn't come from a global competitor or, a hostile state.
Wow.
It came straight from America's closest, most trusted ally, Canada.
It's an extraordinary and, frankly, terrifying moment for anyone who cares about stable trade relations. For decades, we have operated on this assumption that economic integration is a stable, mutually beneficial state.
Right, like an unbreakable bond.
Exactly, a bond reinforced by geography and shared values. But this week, we saw that very integration weaponized.
Weaponized, that's the word for it.
The very system designed to seamlessly bind these two massive economies together was used by Ottawa to deliver a targeted, profound shock to the economic heart of the U.S. manufacturing base.
Exactly. And this is why the sources are so compelling. This is not a typical trade squabble over milk or lumber or, a disagreement over seasonal tariffs.
Yep. No, this is something else entirely. This is a crisis point.
Our analysis indicates this is an economic development that industry executives, especially those relying on just-in-time, cross-border supply chains, arrogantly dismissed.
And policymakers.
Well, the policymakers. Despite what we now know were 18 months of clear, persistent warning signs, they failed completely to comprehend, and so they failed to prepare.
The complacency was monumental, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. We hear that phrase, the world's longest undefended border, constantly. But that historical and geographical comfort led Washington to believe Canada would just absorb any U.S. policy actions.
No matter how disruptive.
No matter how disruptive, they assumed the relationship was just too important for Canada to risk.
So the mission for us here isn't just to report the tariffs or the stock market slide. We need to go deeper.
We have to.
We need to understand the true scale of what happened, the surgical precision of Canada's move, and what the hostile, reflexive U.S. response tells us about the immediate future of global trade. A future where allies are now openly decoupling. That's the crucial context. It's hard for a U.S. listener to grasp the weight of this action. We are talking about two nations that share military and security alliances. NORAD, exactly. The North American Aerospace Defense Command is foundational to our defense, and our economy is so deeply intertwined that they function, in many sectors, as one single entity.
So for Canada to take this dramatic step, unilaterally and without any public warning,
it signals that years of accumulating grievances and failed negotiations have just utterly expired. It's the end of patience.
So let's start in the beginning of that shockwave. What happens when America's closest ally decides they have had enough and goes quiet before making the loudest move?
That is the striking revelation from the sources we reviewed. The quiet before the storm. I mean, we are accustomed to trade disputes being loud.
Right, with public threats, press conferences.
Formal World Trade Organization filings over months. This move was unprecedented in its execution because the U.S. received almost no official public warning.
And that silence, as you mentioned, is what's so unsettling.
Precisely. Within a shocking 72-hour period, Canada delivered what industry reports are calling a crushing blow to U.S. automakers. This wasn't the culmination of months of public, painful negotiation where both sides were preparing.
No, this was an ambush.
It was an action executed with precision and devastating economic force. The goal, according to analysts, was to ensure the U.S. auto industry simply didn't have time to react, to mitigate losses. It was meant to force an immediate political crisis.
And the shock felt so immediate because Washington policymakers and, a lot of industry leaders were just fundamentally unprepared for the speed and the scope of it.
They were. They assumed Canada would, as they often have in the past, prioritize the relationship or yield to pressure.
That hubris was arguably the costliest mistake.
Without a doubt. Our sources detailed that the notion that this was sudden is only true for the public. In fact, there were concrete signals for 18 months that this was coming.
But not through the usual channels.
No, they weren't broadcast through official, public, diplomatic channels. These were the telltale signs that trade economists, the people who monitor this stuff, closely recognized, even if the executive branch ignored them.
Let's pull the curtain back on those signals for the listener. What do those specific alarm bells look like?
Okay, so they weren't headline news, but they were concrete actions. The first indicator was that the routine diplomatic back channels went cold.
What does that mean exactly? Went cold?
Well, trade between these two countries is too vast to be handled only by formal meetings. There are constant low-level negotiations, informal problem-solving channels.
Dealing with things like customs delays, minor regulations.
Exactly. When these channels suddenly cease, it means the Canadian side has stopped trying to solve small problems. They are preparing for a systemic confrontation.
So they stopped managing the relationship and started weaponizing their quiet.
That's a great way to put it. The second signal was the sudden, unexplained recall of Canadian trade negotiators from scheduled meetings.
Pulling them out.
Pulling them out, often without clear rescheduling or adequate explanation. This isn't just cancellation, it's abandonment. It suggests resources are being pulled from dialogue and reallocated to planning.
And the preparation wasn't just diplomatic, it was logistical, right?
Profoundly logistical. The third sign was quiet but aggressive data collection and, well, active discussions regarding alternative supplier agreements, specifically outside of North America.
So they were already looking for an exit ramp from the U.S.
They were hedging. They were identifying where they were most vulnerable to American unilateralism and starting to build protection.
This moves beyond just threat mitigation. This is strategic repositioning.
It does. And the fourth indicator, the most serious one, was the sudden coordination with European and Asian trade partners on issues related to U.S. subsidies.
So they were building a coalition.
Yes. It signaled Canada wasn't just planning a reaction, they were building an international coalition designed to push back against U.S. protectionism.
This confirms it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. It was a meticulously planned strategy, just waiting for the right moment.
Absolutely. It confirms the key insight for you. Whenever Canada goes quiet on trade, it means something is about to get very, very loud. Silence in this context wasn't deference. It was strategic cover.
And the financial fallout that followed was immediate and brutal. The markets reacted violently within hours.
The response was far from symbolic. It triggered full-blown crisis protocols within the largest U.S. automakers. Let's look at the numbers. Within 6 hours of the announcement, General Motors stock dropped a staggering 11%.
11%. For a company that size, that's panic.
It represents billions in instantly wiped out market capitalization and profound investor alarm.
And the shock didn't stop with GM.
Not at all. Ford immediately suspended production announcements and investment plans for 2 critical plant expansions in Michigan.
So future jobs, just gone. On hold indefinitely.
Yes. And Stellantis, which operates on both sides of the border, issued an emergency memo to its suppliers warning of imminent supply chain disruption. They were telling them to prepare for an economic tsunami.
This wasn't a minor setback. This was a chaotic scramble to reroute supply chains that have been optimized over decades.
It was a preparation to absorb billions in losses. It confirms the analysis that Canada's move was a strategic calculation to inflict maximum economic and political damage right out of the gate.
When automakers activate crisis protocols, it's a signal of a catastrophic rupture.
It is. Canada ensured the cost was felt instantly on Wall Street, placing immediate intense pressure not just on the companies, but on Washington, D.C.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the devastation is rooted in the architecture of the North American economy itself.
It is.
We need to talk about why this retaliation was so devastating. It's because most people in the U.S. don't truly realize the depth of economic reliance between the two countries.
You've hit on the core vulnerability. This isn't just about friendship or shared airspace. Our sources frame this as an issue of shared economic survival. The U.S. auto industry cannot function for long without Canada, and vice versa.
The sheer scale of the integration is just. It's often underestimated.
The numbers illustrate it starkly. Over $400 billion in goods cross the U.S.-Canada border every single year.
$400 billion.
That staggering volume makes Canada the U.S.'s second largest trading partner globally. You can't replace that quickly. And crucially, the auto industry alone accounts for nearly $100 billion of that.
$100 billion. So it's the most vulnerable sector by far.
By far. And it's not finished products crossing the border once. It's a constant, complex flow of components crossing back and forth multiple times before a final vehicle is even built.
Right. Analysts always call this a single, deeply integrated supply chain.
That's what it is. I mean, think about it from the factory floor. Parts from Ontario might be shipped to Michigan for a transmission. That transmission goes to an Ohio plant for engine integration. And then the whole powertrain might go back to a plant in Quebec or the U.S.
It's a seamless loop.
A single manufacturing ecosystem that just happens to span an international border. Canada's action jammed a wrench into that high-speed, fragile machine.
So when the Canadian Ministry of Finance released their comprehensive tariff package, It was a declaration.
Oh, absolutely. It was a declaration that diplomacy had failed, patience had ended, and that economic warfare was now on the table. They released retaliatory duties we haven't seen in over 80 years.
Since the 1930s.
Since the fallout from Smoot-Hawley. Let's break down the 3 key measures, because that last one is the absolute surgical strike.
Okay, what was Measure 1?
Measure 1 was the blunt force, a standard high 25% duty on all American-made finished vehicles. If it was assembled in the U.S. and sold to Canada, it just became 25% more expensive overnight.
And Measure 2?
Also a 25% duty, but on critical automotive parts and primary steel components. This immediately raises the cost of production for any vehicle touching the Canadian market or relying on those cross-border inputs.
So these 2 measures create chaos. But the truly devastating targeted action, the one that caused the White House to panic, was Measure 3, the surgical provision.
Yes. This involved an additional targeted 15% surcharge on any vehicle containing components that had previously received U.S. government subsidies.
Okay, now this is crucial. This is the strategic weapon.
It is, because it targets American policy itself.
It targets 2 very specific pieces of legislation, the cornerstones of the administration's industrial strategy.
It directly targets the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and the GPS and Science Act.
For anyone who doesn't follow this closely, the IRA uses massive subsidies to incentivize domestic U.S. production of EVs and batteries.
And the GPS Act does the same for semiconductors. Both were explicitly designed to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., often excluding key allies like Canada from those incentives.
And Canada's message is now crystal clear. If the U.S. wants to subsidize its way to dominance and exclude its allies, it will pay a steep price at the border.
The strategic intent couldn't be clearer. Canada is, in effect, sanctioning American industrial policy. By imposing a 15% tax specifically on subsidized components, they are attempting to neutralize the very advantage those massive subsidies were meant to create.
This elevates the dispute far beyond a simple trade imbalance.
Oh, it becomes a fundamental rejection of America's America First industrial strategy.
Let's elaborate on the surgical nature of that 15% provision. I mean, how exactly are they tracking those subsidies?
That's where the intelligence gathering of those 18 months comes in. Reports indicate the Canadian Ministry of Finance used detailed trade data and industry certifications to track component origin and eligibility for U.S. tax credits.
So they aren't just targeting the final car.
No, they're targeting specific high-value inputs, critical mineral processing, battery cathode production, power electronics, the things that get the biggest IRA benefits. If a specific battery module built in Ohio got an IRA credit, the final vehicle with that module gets hit with the 15% surcharge at the border.
Which makes selling those cars in Canada prohibitively expensive.
Exactly. And they specifically targeted the emerging EV future, which is the future of American manufacturing. The tariffs hit the new EV battery supply network and the assembly plants in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana that had just been expanded.
The strategy here was both brilliant and, as you noted, ruthless.
It was. Canada moved precisely before the United States could fully restructure those supply chains and reduce their dependency on key Canadian components.
So they hit the legacy vehicles, but more importantly, they hit the future, the infrastructure that was supposed to enable U.S. EV dominance.
It's the ultimate strategic checkmate. By penalizing the future of U.S. manufacturing, Canada forces the U.S. to either slow down its domestic plans or sacrifice enormous profits immediately. They weaponize the transition to electric vehicles. Which brings us to the difficult question. Is the U.S. willing to risk a fundamental geopolitical crisis because it insists on fighting fire with gasoline?
That's the profound concern hanging over Washington right now. Our sources describe the White House reaction as urgent, not routine.
No, not at all.
Officials describe Canada's move as disproportionate, economically hostile, and, tellingly, strategically calculated to inflict maximum damage. They knew it was precise.
The irony is rich, isn't it? The strategic calculation only works if the target is vulnerable, and the U.S. was vulnerable because of its own policies. But what was truly alarming was the U.S. response.
It was reactive.
Aggressive.
And showed almost no inclination toward negotiation or compromise.
They just responded with hostile counter-threats, basically escalating the conflict exponentially instead of addressing the core grievance. Yes, pure, undiluted aggression. They threatened more tariffs on Canadian lumber and energy, and most remarkably, they threatened to invoke national security provisions against Canada.
We have to pause here. Threatening to use war-era legislation against a NATO member.
A partner in NORAD. a country whose air and missile defenses are literally integrated with ours.
Threatening national security legislation against a defense partner is. It's almost an act of diplomatic self-harm.
It is. It's a textbook example of how trade disputes escalate out of control. It confirms the critical insight that analysts were already warning about. This is economic policy made by people who fundamentally misunderstand economics.
And trade policy made by people who ignore reciprocity.
Exactly. And let's not forget the context. The U.S. started this cycle of aggression. They imposed tariffs first, citing national security concerns about Canadian steel.
Steel from a continental defense partner.
Yes. The U.S. then acted surprised when Canada finally retaliated.
Reports suggest Canada's retaliation was intentionally designed to test the coherence of American trade policy,
which has been issuing contradictory signals for months, touting free trade while implementing massive protectionist subsidy programs.
So, did the U.S. pass that test of reliability?
Decidedly not. Washington didn't offer serious negotiation. They issued a response so hostile it confirmed Canada's deepest fears.
The Canadian move was a litmus test, then.
It was. Is the U.S. going to be a predictable, reliable partner, or are we permanently in this era of economic unilateralism? The U.S. response was an unambiguous signal. We are an unreliable partner.
This brings us to the most concerning analytical conclusion now circulating: strategic decoupling.
That is the term analysts are using. It describes Canada's immediate and long-term shift-reducing economic dependency on an unreliable partner, even if that partner is the U.S.
That's what should terrify Washington far more than a temporary stock market drop.
It's one thing to fight with global rivals. It's another entirely to actively drive your closest ally toward building new trade relationships that fundamentally exclude you.
So Canada isn't just fighting the tariff.
They are strategically repositioning their entire national economy to be less vulnerable to American political volatility. They are now treating the border as a source of risk, not opportunity.
So we've covered the policy and the strategy. Now, what does this all mean for you, the listener, and the communities built around the automotive industry? This wasn't just economic, was it? It was politically surgical.
That is the absolute brilliance of the Canadian move. Their tariffs were meticulously calibrated not just to slow factory lines, but to inflict maximum political damage in American swing states.
Showing that Canada is an active, sophisticated player.
And one capable of directly influencing U.S. domestic politics.
Let's detail the geography and the sheer scale of the human pain. These are not abstract figures.
No, these are real livelihoods. Our sources predict devastating consequences if these tariffs remain for even 12 months. In Michigan, the potential loss of automotive jobs is projected to hit 40,000.
40,000 in Michigan alone. What about Ohio?
In Ohio, that number is 25,000 jobs. And Indiana faces a potential loss of 15,000 manufacturing jobs.
That is 80,000 families facing immediate insecurity in the heart of the Midwest manufacturing belt.
Exactly. These are communities that voted based on promises of manufacturing revival, based on the idea that trade wars would benefit them. Now, those promises are colliding brutally with reality.
And the effect on the consumer is immediate, too. These tariffs are taxes.
Right. Automakers will pass these costs on, meaning vehicles, especially newer EV models, will become significantly more expensive, dampening demand and further pressuring those jobs.
Meanwhile, the Canadian government has demonstrated profound resolve. The Prime Minister's recent address to Parliament was designed to rally national support.
His language was sharp and nationalistic. He spoke plainly, stating, "Canada did not start this trade war, but Canada will finish it."
And he also said something about dominance and submission, didn't he?
He did. He said, "We will not accept an economic relationship built on American dominance and Canadian submission." This is language designed to convey that Canada views this as a fight for national economic dignity.
And critically, that strong, defiant stance has delivered the most dangerous weapon in a democracy: robust public support.
It has. Reports suggest Canadians are genuinely angry, they feel disrespected, and they are rallying strongly behind their government.
This public support gives the government the critical political room to sustain these tariffs indefinitely, right?
That's a calculation. The U.S. is betting Canada will blink first due to economic pressure. Canada is betting their national resolve, supported by an angry public, will outlast the U.S. administration's political vulnerability in those swing states.
And the American dilemma is just excruciating. The president is under immense pressure from every angle.
Republican hardliners demand more tariffs, manufacturing unions demand protection.
Wall Street desperately wants stability, and consumers just want affordable cars.
When leaders in that vulnerable position face sudden, calculated economic shocks, they often respond from a place of weakness, not strength. They prioritize political optics, which almost invariably leads to more damaging mistakes.
Like the initial hostile counter-threats.
Precisely. And the chaos on the ground is already palpable. This isn't theoretical
I
anymore.
know, it's real for shift workers, procurement teams.
We've seen reports of major logistical nightmares starting in hours, not weeks. General Motors is already trying to reroute component orders away from Canadian suppliers.
Which is a logistical nightmare. That takes months to do properly.
Months, and now they're attempting it on an emergency basis, severely raising costs and the risk of quality issues.
And Ford is actively exploring emergency sourcing agreements with Mexican and Asian manufacturers.
Looking for any port in this self-inflicted storm, they are abandoning decades-long, trusted, efficient supply relationships in a panic.
This highlights the true tragedy. American workers are caught directly between Canadian retaliation and American political stubbornness.
While Washington focuses on political positioning and base mobilization, American manufacturers are receiving a harsh lesson. When the trade war starts, they are on their own.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Canadian action looks less like an isolated bilateral dispute and more like a tectonic shift in global trade.
That is the essential takeaway. The Canadian action was not isolated. It was the spearhead of a larger, coordinated sequence that unfolded within the same 72-hour window.
This suggests a collective, patient response to years of American unilateralism.
And it changes the entire geopolitical dynamic.
The coordinated encirclement is the key strategic concept here. Canada's strike was the loudest, but others were moving at the same time.
Exactly. While Canada hit U.S. manufacturing, Mexico announced they are reviewing retaliatory options against American agricultural exports, a highly sensitive sector.
And the European Union.
The EU accelerated the implementation of their own long-planned counter-tariffs.
And even Japan, usually highly cautious, tightened the screws.
They did. Japan increased scrutiny of American automotive imports, targeting safety and environmental compliance standards. It's a slow, bureaucratic way of imposing friction and cost without new tariffs.
So all these pieces move together,
Signaling a global consensus. The U.S. era of unilateral trade aggression must stop.
This means the U.S. is facing multilateral resistance. It's a global trading system saying enough is enough.
The U.S. has operated for several years under the arrogant assumption that it is too big to retaliate against and too important for its allies to fight back. That assumption is now failing dramatically.
So we are fundamentally witnessing the weaponization of economic interdependence against the United States itself.
For decades, the U.S. believed that integrating our economy so deeply with the world gave us immense leverage over others. We are now discovering the uncomfortable truth that integration also gave substantial leverage to others over us.
The very system we helped build is now being used to constrain us.
Precisely.
This brings us to the possibilities for the future. And, none of them look particularly comforting for the American worker. Analysts are worried about three major scenarios.
The first and least damaging is that Canada is merely forcing the U.S. back to the negotiating table through blunt economic pain.
A painful but necessary correction.
Yes, resulting in the U.S. removing its underlying tariffs and subsidies. The second scenario suggests something much more structural.
Which is
Canada preparing for a